For more, we're joined by Ivo Daalder. He's a former US ambassador to NATO. He's also the CEO of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and host of the podcast World Review with Ivo Daalder. Ambassador, good to have you with us tonight. You were saying 2 weeks ago that we need a fundamental course correction based on what we're seeing, and the risk, if not, is that the catastrophe that we're seeing on a humanitarian basis in Gaza risked displacing the events of October 7th. Are we at that point? Have we moved beyond that point?
Well, we're certainly getting very close to that point in the sense that I've just been watching your show and seeing that the concern that is uppermost in people's minds is the humanitarian situation inside Gaza, which is becoming worse by the minute. And the lack of an ability of the international community to bring in the much needed aid and assistance that is necessary to deal with that crisis. And as a result, we are forgetting what happened on October 7th and the public commentary. You just quoted the Jordanian foreign minister who talked about war crimes. Clearly what Hamas did was a war crime. It was horrendous. It was the worst day in Jewish history since the Holocaust. But what is happening on the ground in Gaza is at the same time changing the narrative in an important way. And I think the reason that President Biden asked Secretary of State Antony Blinken to go to Jerusalem and to insist and ask for a pause to allow humanitarian aid is exactly that the narrative is being lost not only in the Arab street, it's being lost on Western squares where there were huge public demonstrations and increasingly around the world. And the reason is that the war is justified, but the need to deal with the humanitarian consequences of this fight are now uppermost in people's mind.
I mean, you and I have discussed in the past that we don't know what next is, whether that's the short term or the longer term. And it's complicated now by the increasing and utter destruction of housing and infrastructure in Gaza that at some point very quickly is going to have to be fixed, and that's going to have consequences for the people that live there too. How convinced are you on the latest trip that Secretary Blinken has done that the Israelis communicated to him what the plan is beyond this war?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not convinced at all that they were communicating what the plan is afterwards. I think the Israelis are still, understandably, but strategically, unfortunately, focused on the destruction of Hamas and making sure that what happened on October 7 can never happen to them again, a goal that I think we all should share. At the same time, it's increasingly clear that thinking through what comes after Hamas, who rules Gaza, and how you destroy or at least topple Hamas without causing the incredible humanitarian costs that are being inflicted on the people of Gaza is now as important. And I think that is the message that Secretary Blinken was bringing. And I'm afraid that the Israelis are still focused on how do they go after Hamas rather than figuring out how do they limit civilian casualties at the same time. And importantly, what comes after. And that is now becoming increasingly a pressure point. It's why the Arab leaders that Secretary Blinken met with today in Amman are so insistent on a ceasefire, which frankly wouldn't solve anything. A ceasefire would just allow Hamas to recoup and regenerate the power that it has, and frankly doesn't help the people there. What comes after the ceasefire, what comes after this war, now needs to be a topic of uttermost of people's minds.
Yeah, you said at the beginning of this conversation that we're approaching the point upon which that pressure, the humanitarian crisis and the efforts to tackle Hamas and ensure that this never happens again is almost there. What changes Israel's actions in this regard? And where does the pressure ultimately have to come from, if not from within? We saw protests in Israel today too.
Yeah, I think ultimately the only way Israel would change course or move in a different direction isn't the pressure that Washington, let alone the rest of the world, can put on Israel. It has to come internally, and there has to be a push internally to understand that the way this war is being conducted at the moment is not serving Israel's interest. And the interest is, yes, in toppling Hamas and making sure that Hamas is never in a position to do what it did on October 7th, but it is also to create a situation that is stable and long-lasting, and that does not lead to a further escalation of this war. Unfortunately, I think too many fear, and I share that fear, that the way the war is being conducted right now is not likely to move in that direction.
Ambassador, one way to at least try and suppress this is financial. And it's not just about Hamas. There is an axis in the region. It includes Hezbollah and others. Is there enough discussion at the United States level with Arab leaders in the region, the EU, for example, of trying to cut off the funding here? And I have to look at Iran in that respect, whether it's sanctions or intelligence. Is enough discussion about that taking place?
Julia, I think you're making an excellent point. I think there is an axis of resistance, as you mentioned. It is directed by, funded by, and coordinated by Tehran. And this is certainly the time when the United States, working with its allies in Europe and in the Arab world, none of whom want Tehran to increase its influence in the region, need to find new and better ways to put the pressure on Iran. The good news is that for now, at least, it looks like Iran is not interested in an all-out war. It has, nor is Hezbollah. And so we are limiting the kinds of incursions we're seeing from the Houthis, from militia forces and Hezbollah, that is still quite limited. But the bad news is that the war is not ending, that the push to continue it is still there. And so better coordination among the allies, with the Arab countries, to find ways to pressure Tehran at this point is exactly what we need.
Yes, we need to hear more of it. Ambassador, great to chat to you, sir. As always, thank you for joining us with your views and insight.